20%. That's how much of the world's oil, every single barrel that humanity burns, refines, ships and turns into plastic, medicine and jet fuel passes through a single stretch of water. Not a pipeline, not a trade agreement, not a carefully negotiated international treaty, a gap between two countries that, at its narrowest point, is only 21 miles wide. The actual shipping lanes are even smaller, 2 miles in each direction. That's it. 2 miles of open ocean, and through it flows the economic lifeblood of the modern world, the Strait of Hormuz. If you've ever driven your car, flown on an airplane, or sat in a heated building, this narrow corridor had something to do with that. And today we're going to take it apart, piece by piece, because what we found while researching this video, the alternative routes, the military calculations, the canal blueprints, and the one option almost nobody talks about, might fundamentally change how you think about where your energy comes from. Let's start with the geography, because to understand what's at stake, you need to feel the scale of what flows through here. Look at the Persian Gulf on a map. It's shaped like a thumb pressing down on the Middle East. And around the edges of that thumb sit some of the most oil-rich territories on Earth. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter. Iraq, with over 145 billion barrels of proven reserves. Kuwait, Qatar, home to one of the planet's largest natural gas fields, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. Every single one of these nations needs to get their oil out, and almost all of them have the same exit. One door, the Strait of Hormuz. On a quiet day, roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through that door, every single day. To put 20 million barrels into human terms, that's enough oil to fill roughly 3,200 Olympic-sized swimming pools every day, moving through a corridor you could drive across in under 30 minutes. Now here's what keeps energy analysts up at night. The global economy is calibrated down to the dollar around the assumption that this corridor stays open. Power plants in Japan, refineries in South Korea, factories in Germany, none of them store more than a few weeks of fuel at any given time. They don't need to, because the tankers keep coming, until of course they don't. In 2019, 2 oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Insurance premiums for ships passing through the region spiked by more than 1,000% almost overnight. Not because the strait closed, but because the market started asking, what if it does? That question, what if it closes, is one of the most consequential unanswered questions in modern geopolitics. And to understand it, we need to understand who sits at the door. Here is something counterintuitive about military power. The most effective threats are sometimes the ones you never carry out, because the possibility of disruption can cause almost as much economic damage as the disruption itself. Iran understands this better than almost any other nation on Earth. The Islamic Republic shares the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. Its territory stretches across the entire northern edge of the waterway. From the Musandam Peninsula on the east to the Shat al-Arab on the west, Iran sits on top of the strait like a lid on a bottle. And over decades, Iran has quietly built what military planners call an anti-access/area denial capability, or A2/AD. It's a military doctrine designed to make it catastrophically expensive for an enemy naval force to operate in a given area. What does that mean in practice for the Strait of Hormuz? Iran possesses an estimated several hundred anti-ship cruise missiles. Many of them are road mobile, meaning they can be moved, hidden and repositioned faster than satellite surveillance can track them. They also maintain a large fleet of small, fast attack boats, sometimes called swarm boats, capable of overwhelming larger warships through sheer numbers. They have laid extensive underwater mine inventories, and they control several islands inside the strait itself, including Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Tumbs, which they seized from the UAE in 1971 and have fortified ever since. This combination, missiles, mines, islands, and swarming boats, means that closing the Strait of Hormuz, or at least making it terrifyingly dangerous to navigate, is within Iran's operational capability. But here's where it gets complicated. Closing the strait would also be an act of economic self-destruction for Iran, because Iran itself exports oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Blocking the waterway would cut off one of its few remaining sources of hard currency. It would hand the United States a legal justification for military action. And it would enrage China, Iran's largest oil customer, whose economic cooperation Iran desperately needs under sanctions. So Iran holds the trigger, but pulling it would injure itself as much as anyone else. This is why military strategists call the Strait of Hormuz a deterrence trap. Iran is powerful enough to threaten the strait, but threatening to use that power too aggressively risks destroying the very leverage that makes the threat valuable. And this is where the United States enters the picture. Let's be precise about what controlling the Strait of Hormuz would actually mean. It would not mean simply sailing a carrier through the middle and declaring victory. The strait is too complex, too contested, and too valuable for that kind of theatre. Real control, the kind that keeps 20 million barrels flowing reliably every day, would require a layered, sustained military and diplomatic campaign that has been wargamed inside the Pentagon for decades. Here is how it would unfold, layer by layer. Layer 1. Suppression of Iran's anti-ship missile batteries. Iran's most dangerous capability isn't its navy, it's the missiles, road-mobile launchers along the coast, dug into mountainsides, concealed in tunnels. The first phase of any US operation to secure the strait would involve a sustained campaign to locate and destroy these systems, using a combination of satellite imagery, signals intelligence from NSA, and real-time targeting from surveillance drones flying continuous orbits over Iranian coastal territory. The US Air Force's B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, operating from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, can deliver precision munitions to hardened underground targets with a radar cross-section smaller than a bird. Iran's missile complexes, even the most fortified ones, are not immune to a coordinated B-2 strike package. Layer 2. Mine clearance operations. Iran has invested heavily in naval mines, cheap, effective, and extraordinarily difficult to neutralize at scale. The US Navy maintains dedicated mine countermeasure vessels, including the Avenger-class MCM ships. These operate alongside airborne mine countermeasure helicopters and underwater drone systems capable of mapping and detonating minefields while keeping sailors out of danger. But mine clearance is slow. Even with modern equipment, clearing the Strait of Hormuz of a serious Iranian mining effort could take days to weeks. During that window, insurance companies would halt all commercial traffic regardless of military promises, which is why the second component of mine countermeasures is deterrence, the credible threat of severe retaliation for any Iranian mine deployment communicated through back channels before the first mine is ever laid. Layer 3. Naval dominance and carrier presence. The US Navy's Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, maintains a persistent presence in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. A carrier strike group, organized around a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, brings roughly 7,500 personnel, 65 aircraft, and a protective envelope of guided missile cruisers and destroyers. The carrier air wing can conduct strike missions across the entire length and breadth of Iran in a single day. But carriers are also large, valuable, and somewhat vulnerable in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. Standard US doctrine would likely keep a carrier in the deeper waters of the Arabian Sea, using its air wing at range, while smaller surface combatants and submarines operate inside the strait itself. Layer 4. Controlling the islands. Remember those 3 islands, Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, that Iran controls in the middle of the strait? In any serious US operation to secure the waterway, those islands would need to be neutralized. They sit directly in the middle of the shipping lanes. From them, Iran can deploy anti-ship missiles, radar systems, and small boat swarms. They are, in effect, unsinkable aircraft carriers positioned exactly where Iran needs them to be. A US-led operation to remove Iranian military presence from those islands would involve a combination of precision strikes to destroy fortifications, followed by a potential amphibious landing by US Marines or Allied forces to establish a presence. The legal and diplomatic complications of seizing territory that the UAE claims as its own but Iran physically controls would be significant. But strategically, leaving those islands intact while attempting to secure the strait would be like trying to lock the front door while leaving the windows open. Layer 5. The submarine dimension. This is the layer that rarely gets discussed publicly. US Navy Los Angeles and Virginia-class submarines routinely operate in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Indian Ocean. They are invisible, persistent, and lethal. Any Iranian naval vessel that attempted to exit the strait to engage US surface ships would do so knowing that one or more American submarines was likely tracking it. This silent presence creates a powerful deterrent against Iran's fast boat swarming doctrine, because a submarine can engage a surface vessel long before it reaches effective missile range. Now, controlling the Strait of Hormuz militarily is one thing. Keeping it controlled day after day, week after week, while global oil markets demand guaranteed reliability, is something else entirely. Which is why engineers, not just generals, have been looking at this problem, and they have some very different ideas. Every strategy requires a backup plan, and for the Strait of Hormuz, the backup plans have been quietly under construction for years. But here is something the official summaries don't always tell you. None of them are anywhere close to adequate. Let's go through each one, and let's be honest about the math. The Saudi East-West Pipeline. Saudi Arabia built the Petroline, a pipeline stretching 1,200 kilometers across the Arabian Peninsula from the oil fields of the eastern province to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. It exists precisely for moments when the strait is threatened. Maximum capacity, about 5 million barrels per day. The strait handles 20 million. The pipeline handles 1/4 of that. And even that capacity requires the tanker traffic on the Red Sea to remain open, which has its own vulnerabilities, as Houthi attacks on shipping demonstrated as recently as 2023 and 2024. The UAE's Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline. The UAE, acutely aware of its vulnerability to any Hormuz closure, built a pipeline from its Habshan oil facility directly to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the strait entirely. It can carry about 1.5 million barrels per day. That's significant for the UAE's own exports. But it does nothing for Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, or Saudi Arabia's Gulf-side terminals, the Iraq-Turkey pipeline. Iraq has a pipeline that runs north through Kurdistan to the Turkish Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. Capacity: around 1.6 million barrels per day when fully operational, though the line has suffered repeated sabotage and political disputes that have kept it running below capacity for years. The Oman LNG export alternative. For natural gas, which is even more difficult to reroute than crude oil, Oman operates LNG export terminals at Qulhat that sit outside the strait, but the volumes are modest compared to what Qatar ships through the strait from its massive North Field. Qatar Petroleum's LNG terminals are inside the Gulf. In a closure scenario, they go dark. Add up every existing bypass pipeline, every alternative export terminal, every workaround built over the past 40 years. The total diversion capacity comes to somewhere between 8 and 10 million barrels per day. The strait handles 20 million. You are still short by at least 10 million barrels every single day. That gap, 10 million barrels, represents roughly 10% of global oil consumption, missing for days, weeks, or longer. The price implications of that gap are almost impossible to overstate. The 1973 Arab oil embargo, which reduced global supply by only about 5%, caused a roughly 400% increase in oil prices. The economic recession that followed cost the United States alone an estimated $2.3 trillion in today's dollars. 10% gone, not for months, but even for weeks, would be in a different category entirely. Which brings us to the solution that engineers keep coming back to, the one that would actually solve the problem. If only reality cooperated. Imagine you are standing on the Persian Gulf coast of Oman's Musandam Peninsula. The water is calm, blue-grey and flat in the morning light. Behind you, the Hajar Mountains rise from the shoreline like a wall, sharp limestone, ancient fractured rock. Some of these peaks are over 2,000 meters high, taller than anything in the continental United States east of the Rockies, and they rise straight from the sea. There is no coastal plain to ease into, just ocean, then vertical rock. Now someone hands you a shovel and says, "We need a canal. Deep enough for the largest ships ever built, wide enough for two-way traffic, through those mountains, as fast as possible." This is the Musandam Canal proposal, and it has been seriously discussed by engineers, strategists, and energy economists for decades. The geography is almost tantalizing. In some places, the Musandam Peninsula is only about 50 to 80 kilometers wide between the Persian Gulf coast and the Gulf of Oman. On a map, it looks almost trivially short. Why not just cut through? Because the mountains are in the way. A canal capable of accommodating very large crude carriers, the supertankers that carry 2 million barrels of oil apiece, would need to be approximately 350 meters wide and at least 25 meters deep. That is not dredging sand from a flat delta. That is removing entire mountain peaks, blasting rock with volumes of explosive that would rival some of the largest mining operations in human history. The amount of material that would need to be excavated is estimated at several billion cubic meters. For context, the Panama Canal expansion project moved about 100 million cubic meters of material and cost $5.4 billion. The Musandam Canal would require perhaps 30 to 50 times that excavation volume. And that's before accounting for the cost of the rock itself, which is dramatically harder and more expensive to remove than the soft alluvial material of the Panama Isthmus. Conservative engineering estimates put the project costs somewhere between $200 billion and $500 billion. Some analyses suggest it could exceed $1 trillion when you factor in environmental mitigation, security infrastructure, and the political cost of building international consensus for a project of this scale. And then there is the timeline. Even with unlimited funding and political will, neither of which exists, the Musandam Canal could not be operational for at least 15 to 20 years after groundbreaking. The world needs a solution to Hormuz vulnerability now, not in 2045. So what does that leave us? Here are 4 bypass strategies that rarely make it into mainstream coverage, but that defense planners, energy traders, and sovereign wealth fund managers think about very carefully. The Pakistan Corridor. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) includes infrastructure investments that, if extended, could theoretically allow Gulf oil to move overland through Iran or Afghanistan into Pakistan, and then by pipeline to the port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea. China has discussed exactly this. It would bypass the strait completely. It would also run through some of the most geopolitically unstable territory on Earth. But the strategic logic is there, and China, which imports roughly 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, has every incentive to build it. The Iraq-Jordan pipeline revival. Iraq has repeatedly proposed reviving an old pipeline that would carry oil west across Jordan to the Aqaba port on the Red Sea. The route bypasses Iran entirely. Jordan has shown intermittent interest. The project has been stalled by financing gaps and regional instability for decades, but the pipeline right-of-way largely still exists. Refurbishing and extending it would cost a fraction of the Musandam Canal, and it could be done in 5 to 7 years. Strategic reserve deployment. The United States, Japan, South Korea, Germany, and other IEA members collectively maintain strategic petroleum reserves totaling approximately 1.5 billion barrels. In a true Hormuz closure emergency, a coordinated IEA release could theoretically replace strait flows for 75 days, buying time for military resolution or diplomatic negotiation. This option has actually been used. During the 2011 Libya crisis, the IEA released 60 million barrels. The logistical and political coordination required is immense, but the mechanism exists: floating storage and offshore terminals. This is the most underappreciated option. Several Gulf states have quietly invested in expanding very large crude carrier fleets that can function as floating storage, sitting outside the strait in the Gulf of Oman, preloaded, ready to deliver without re-entering the choke point. Combined with offshore loading buoys positioned in international waters east of the strait, this creates a buffer inventory that could absorb a short-term closure. It's not a long-term solution, but for a disruption measured in days rather than weeks, floating storage could prevent the worst of the price spike. The uncomfortable conclusion when you add all of this up is this: there is no single solution to Hormuz vulnerability. There is only a portfolio of partial solutions, each covering a different time horizon and a different type of disruption. And in the meantime, the 21-mile bottleneck remains exactly what it has always been. There is a temptation, in an era of satellites and software and instant global communication, to believe that geography has become irrelevant. That the internet has shrunk the world, that physical distance no longer dictates the flow of power. The Strait of Hormuz disagrees: 21 miles of water, 2 shipping lanes, an ancient geological accident, and the entire modern economy runs through it. The empires of the digital age still run on oil. The data centers that power your apps require electricity. That electricity is generated in significant part by fuels that move through the strait. The supply chains that deliver your phone, your car, your food, all of them touch, at some point, the economics of energy. And energy flows through Hormuz. The canal will probably never be built. The pipelines will never fully substitute for tankers. The strategic reserves will never be quite large enough. And the military deterrence will remain exactly what it is, a balance of threats, not a guarantee of peace. So the next time you fill your tank or board a flight or read a headline about tensions in the Persian Gulf, remember those 21 miles. Remember that the most powerful force in the modern global economy is not a central bank, or a technology platform, or a nuclear weapon. It is a gap between two coastlines, and the world has not yet figured out how to close it.